Look at me. What do you see? Is it possibly my hair, my big round eyes, or my deep brown skin? I am different. And although I've gone through moments that should make me uncomfortable in the skin I am in, I am blessed to have a mother who has taught me to wear it proudly and purposely because it is beautiful, unique, and ultimately what allows me to have platforms such as this to speak upon issues firsthand in order to shed light on what is usually uncomfortable but surely present. As you heard in the gospel, social status did not prevent the Samaritan from helping his neighbor in despair. At the time, it was not socially acceptable for Samaritans to interact with Jewish people, but the Samaritan's decision to help the injured man transcend social barriers and status as he acknowledged the man's dignity and worth as a human being. The Jewish man was beaten, robbed, and left for dead while people of higher ranking, such as the priest and Levite, turned a blind eye to the help he was seeking. When I read this, I thought of victims today who also cry out for help, but are unheard as our world leaders turn the other way. But in our gospel, the Good Samaritan didn't stop there. He helped heal the man and went to the extent of ensuring him safety. Today, our world is constantly moving further away from this lesson. Reading the news, we are constantly bombarded with stories about the degradation and devaluing of other human beings based on race or social status. And oftentimes, I have felt similar to the Jewish person, being robbed of my dignity and self-worth that should be inherent to me. Personally, this was most apparent in my parents' journey to America, which consisted of trials and tribulations as they overcame obstacles that have molded them into the relentless people they are today. Together, my parents immigrated from Ethiopia, a country in Eastern Africa, in 1988 to escape a government dictatorship. From Kenya to Georgia, to Ohio, then finally California, they had been exposed to complete culture shock as they were forced to live in territories unfamiliar to their upbringing, not to mention their inability to speak English and comprehend it. They did not have the means to support themselves, but relied solely on the hope that my sister and I would not have to face the hardship they had endured if they worked hard enough, unaware of the oppression that would follow. Before, they were not exposed to such biases. But it saddens me when I hear negative remarks towards immigrants today. It is actually proven that immigrants represent 33% of engineers, 27% of mathematicians, statisticians, and computer scientists. From my father working multiple jobs at a screen printing company, manufacturing, IBM, to now owning his own courier service, to my mother working her way up to management in a restaurant at the time, my family is an example that immigrants and people of color contribute immensely to our society. In 2017, after almost 30 years in America, my parents still witnessed and experienced the marginalization of minorities. As a first-generation African American, I have had multiple exposures to the hardship many minorities and ethnic groups face in this nation. Even though I grew up in such a diverse community, I still did not have many friends that looked like me or resembled similar features inherent to my African roots. Even more so, I have witnessed and personally experienced explicit bias and name-calling towards me and my family. And on a more global scale, when we turn on the news and social media, we hear of the termination of DACA, police brutality, and the turning away of refugees seeking asylum. Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Tanisha Anderson, and countless others who have fallen victim to police brutality are the modern-day injured man in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Not only does this frustrate me, but it angers me that my own friend, a member of the class of 2017 here at Mitty, chose to turn down a full ride to his dream school because he was afraid to board a plane since he was a recipient of DACA. These examples make it clear that we have created a separation within our society. Rather than uniting and lifting each other up like the Good Samaritan does, we are tearing each other down and choosing to build walls. But still, in the midst of all of this, there are people who choose to reach out a hand, even across barriers. Here at Mitty, my mentor, Ms. Morales, has sat with me in times of self-doubt, fear, and questioning. And through groups on campus such as ASU and LASU, I'm able to understand that love is in fact the evidence. In her office, she constantly has a door open for anyone to come express themselves and have a comfortable environment to admire their commonalities and backgrounds as we continuously try to wrap our heads around what is happening in our chaotic world. In our religion classes last week, when we reread Mr. Brosnan's letter regarding DACA, we were invited to reflect on how our faith calls us to stand in solidarity and seek justice. But how exactly will you do it? As our liturgical theme song proclaims, mercy and grace and compassion are just words without action. Just because problems do not affect you directly does not mean that they are non-existent and do not directly impact members of our community. In order to get rid of the otherness that can divide us, you can start small. Here's some things I try to do. When we ask to find partners or groups in class, instead of just gravitating towards my friends, I try to seek out people who may not easily find a group or who I don't know very well yet. Or I see Christmas wishes or prom court nominations as opportunities to uplift members of our community who may go unnoticed. These small actions can lead to bigger ones. This past year, I joined ASU and LASU as we teamed up with local public and private schools to create SJ Squared, a slow-growing group of students and faculty who seek change in social justice through education and advocacy. So challenge yourself. Do not accept social injustice because it seems easier. When you see people crying out for help, do not turn a blind eye. Be bold, be courageous, choose to love. Because if God so loved us, we must also love one another. No one has ever seen God, yet if we love one another, God remains in us. It can be hard to see where God is in the midst of division, yet, as our first reading suggests, we can see God when we choose to love one another. What makes the love the Good Samaritan shows in the parable so radical is that he chooses to reach out across social barriers and make love evident. So, how do we make love evident despite differences, like race, gender, or social class that can divide us? Uniting and uplifting people who look like me are a few of the ways we can tear down those walls and begin to build bridges. Thank you.